They say the law is like a spider's web. It's great at catching the little flies, but lets the big ones slip right through. I mean, why do lawyers wear suits? Because they need to look sharp when they're cutting through the truth. And speaking of truth, ever notice how government officials are like magicians? They can make your money disappear and then reappear as taxes. I once asked a judge if he could give me a lighter sentence. He said, sure, but only if you can prove you're not a heavy criminal. And what's the difference between a politician and a flying pig? The letter F. I tried to start a law firm specializing in government contracts, but I realized it was just a way to get rich off other people's mistakes. They say ignorance of the law is no excuse, but I think it should come with a warning label. Handle with care, results may vary. In the end, the only thing more twisted than the law is the way they write it, like a riddle wrapped in a mystery, inside an enigma, and then buried under a pile of paperwork. I told my lawyer, my life's a cold case. He replied, don't worry, our legal system makes sure nothing ever gets solved. When I asked a judge, do you believe in justice? He said, in our courtroom, justice is like a ghost, always talked about but never seen. My government is so inefficient, even death filed an appeal for a delay. They say transparency in government is vital, but in my town, it's as rare as a daylight hearing in a pitch-black courtroom. I asked a senator, what's the secret to political success? He grinned and said, it's simple. Live by the law and die by the loophole. My local bureaucracy is like a haunted house. Every policy is a ghost of what could have been. The new government reform is so dark, even the Grim Reaper is afraid to RSVP. I told my attorney, I feel like a statute of limitations waiting to expire. He replied, at least that guarantees a final deadline. In our courts, even the verdicts are in mourning. Apparently, justice is always in a state of elegy. I asked a politician, how do you stay honest? He replied, by keeping my conscience as dead as my promises. Government accountability here is like a secret burial, hidden deep underground and never to be unearthed. My legal team is so overworked, even the cemetery's full. Our cases are buried with no one left to exhume them. I tried filing a complaint against the system, but the clerk said, your case is already in the tomb of forgotten files. They say every law is written in ink, but here it's more like disappearing ink, gone by the time you read it. The judge said, your argument is dead on arrival. I replied, at least it doesn't need a resuscitation order like our policies. I asked my bureaucrat, when will reforms come? He shrugged. Right after we finish polishing our resignation letters. My government is so dark, even the budget's a death sentence. Everyone's in arrears with their souls. I told a senator, my life is a felony waiting to be charged. He said, then consider yourself sentenced to life in our dark, endless committee meetings. Courtrooms here are like black holes. No matter how hard you plead, your hope gets sucked into oblivion. I asked a district attorney, what's the remedy for corruption? He replied, we're working on one. It's currently awaiting execution in the depths of red tape. Working in government is like serving a life sentence without parole, just endless paperwork and despair. I told my lawyer, my future's so bleak, even the appeals court couldn't resurrect it. The government promised change. I guess they meant a permanent state of morbid inertia. I went to vote for reform, but my ballot was returned for being too dark. Apparently, hope is an unacceptable shade here. I asked a judge, how do you decide a case? He said, I just wait for the darkness to settle and then deliver a verdict from the abyss. The legal system here is so grim, even the plea bargains come with a death clause. I joined a protest for government accountability. The police said, your right to dissent is expired like a condemned case. I told my attorney, I'm living in a dead state of affairs. He said, welcome to the DMV of justice, where nothing ever moves. Our policies are like tombstones, etched in stone but forgotten by history. I asked a bureaucrat, is there an exit from this maze? He replied, only through the dark corridor of endless forms and signatures. They say justice is blind, but in our courts it's also deaf and stumbling through the shadows. My government's transparency is like a blackout. If you're lucky, you catch a glimpse of something before it fades into darkness. I told a senator, my career is a legal limbo. He said, in our system, even limbo gets convicted. Our reform committee is so morbid they hold meetings in morgues, so at least the atmosphere matches their promises. I asked a judge, do you believe in reform? He whispered, reform is just a term for a slow, inevitable descent into darkness. My lawyer said, your case is cold. I replied, that's because it's been frozen in the archives of government apathy for years. The new policy is so dark, even the statute books refuse to open. They're all locked in a vault of despair. I asked, what's the most effective law in this country? The answer, the law of irony, where every reform dies a slow, dark death. My government is the ultimate dark comedy. Every bill passed is a punchline that ends in tragedy. I told my senator, your promises are like graves, always promising a resting place, but never delivering life. In our system, even the ghost of a fair trial is buried under layers of bureaucracy. I tried to find hope in the legislature, but every session was a eulogy for progress. The prosecutor said, your argument is as lifeless as our public service. I replied, at least mine doesn't come with a death sentence of inefficiency. I asked a lawyer, how do you stay hopeful in this system? He said, by knowing that even despair has a deadline. Your case will eventually be dismissed. The government promised to light a fire under reform. Instead, they handed out extinguishers at every meeting. I told my bureaucrat, your department is a beacon of hope. He replied, yes, if you're lost in the darkness of our failures. I asked a judge, when does justice prevail? He said, when the last candle in this dark hall of appeals finally burns out. My representative's speech was so full of empty promises, it could serve as the obituary for progress. The legal aid office said, we're here to help. I asked, help me find the light. They said, our services only operate in the shadows. I went to a government meeting. The only thing dark was the outlook on reform, which was buried under a mountain of rejected ideas. I told my lawyer, my life's an unsolvable case. He replied, then consider yourself sentenced to eternal dark humor. The bureaucracy here is so dark, even the filing cabinets are rumored to be haunted by forgotten cases. I asked a politician, do you have a heart? He said, only if it's been certified by the Department of Morbidity and Inefficiency. My government is like a haunted courthouse. Every verdict echoes with the sound of lost hopes and wasted potential. I tried to appeal a decision. The appeal board said, your plea is as lifeless as our reform promises. I told my attorney, I'm dying for change. He said, then get ready. The verdict on our system is already in its final stages. The judge said, your case is too dark for a proper hearing. I replied, at least it's consistent with the state of our laws. I asked a bureaucrat, where's the line between reform and ruin? He answered, right here, in the shadows of our hollow promises. My government's ethics committee is so dark, even their meeting minutes come with a warning. May cause existential dread. I told a senator, my life is a trial by fire. He said, in our legislature, the fire is extinguished by the waters of bureaucratic indifference. The legal system here is like a noir film, cynical, bleak, and with a plot that always ends in tragedy. I asked my lawyer if there's a loophole in our government. He replied, only if you're prepared to jump into the abyss of failed reforms. My representative promised a brighter future. Too bad it was delivered in the pitch-black packaging of government inertia. I told a judge, I need a fresh start. He replied, welcome to our system, where fresh starts are buried with yesterday's bills. The new law is so morbid, it should come with a disclaimer. Warning, may induce permanent disillusionment. I asked a politician,